everyone, welcome to our fourth LP research workshop. My name is Professor Ashley Arrington. Today we will focus on case law research. First, however, I want to reflect on what we talked about during our last and third workshop. We were focused on researching codified law there, and we talked about several different methods. As we've said before, right, codified law encompasses more than just statutes, also constitutions, regulations, local court rules. However, we did focus more so on looking for relevant statutes. So, in terms of thinking about that statutory research, we talked about 5 different methods that we can use to find statutes. The first thing we talked about was by citation, which is the easiest way, right? How would you have a citation, right? You would have looked to step 2, right? You would have looked to your secondary sources to get a relevant citation that you can work from. You could also use the popular name table, right? We talked about how you may have the popular name of an act and not the formal name in its entirety. So, for example, Obamacare rather than Affordable Care Act. You can use the popular name table to narrow into look for Obamacare, and that will ultimately take you to the Affordable Care Act. We also talked about using finding tools like the index, right? So primarily using those tools that are available sometimes on Lexis, but more times available on Westlaw, so narrowing in and searching by keywords within the index, right? We talked about how the index is designed to help us get where we're supposed to go. We had the example during our last workshop specific to oil and gas leases, right? If you started with oil or gas or lease, you could still ultimately get to the same place using the index. We also talked about just browsing the table of contents, right? Which can take some time, but sometimes is a helpful option if you're not familiar with the language or the structure of the statutory code section. So those are our 5 methods. Our 5th method was advanced searching, right? So we want to use these tools where we can. Popular name table, index, browsing the table of contents, but we also have the option to use advanced searching to build a keyword search, to use some of those Boolean terms and connectors to build a more successful query that we have an understanding of how that database will read that query, right? But those are the 5 methods, okay? So citation, right? Popular name table, index, table of contents, and then advanced searching. So we talked about all of those things last time. So I want to ask you to reflect on how these methods help you determine if a statute is relevant. So, right, thinking about the citation method. So we've found that from a secondary source, right? Pulled that citation reference from a secondary source that you've already used to analyze the issue and identify a potentially relevant statute, right? And we talked about tools like the index, table of contents, popular name table. You're engaging in analysis here because you are starting to see through these tools how these statutes are grouped and the language that's used, right? So that helps you to better understand how that statute fits into the broader legal context. And then finally, with advanced searching, right, you can refine your query based on the keywords or phrases that you gathered in your prior use of secondary sources or researching other related statutes, right, which helps you to further focus on those statutes that are most relevant to your issue, right? So these tools in a number of ways help us to determine whether our statute is relevant to the legal issue. pulling us back to our 4-step process, right? Where are we? Our first session, we focused on step 1, right, with our issue analysis. That was our who, what, when, where, why, right? Walking through what's the legal issue we're looking at, what is the precise question we need to answer, who are the parties at issue, what is the relationship between those parties, what jurisdiction are we in, like what do I know about this area of law, what do I need to know to answer the question at issue, right? So walking through that preliminary analysis before moving into the next steps of your research process. So step 2 is looking to secondary sources, right? We've talked about the benefits of secondary sources. 1, orienting us to a new area of law, providing us that background and context so we can have that contextual understanding, and then also pointing us to relevant primary sources, right? We're saving time and we're more efficient at researching when we use secondary sources to point us to primary sources rather than just jumping into a database, throwing some keyword searches in, and hoping that we get to the relevant sources. Then we just looked at step 3, right? That was the focus of our last workshop, and we just looked at how there are a number of methods that we can use to find relevant codified law. Statutes was really our main focus during our last workshop. And then our 4th step today is focusing on case law. So seeking out case law precedent, whether that is mandatory or binding precedent, or alternatively persuasive or not binding precedent, right? So in the same way that we saw multiple methods for seeking out codified law, we're once again going to see multiple methods for seeking out relevant case law. So again, that's where we're at. Moving into step 4, researching case law precedent. These learning objectives are really for you to come back to later on. If you want to just ensure that you are where you need to be, please come back to these and you can kind of look through these objectives and ask yourself whether you're walking away with the objectives that you were intended to take away from the lesson. Okay, so let's talk about how we know whether a case is mandatory or binding. You'll hear both of those terms, versus when it's persuasive or not binding, right? So there are 2 main factors that we're looking at here. The first is jurisdiction, right? Thinking about, are we at the state or federal level? Are we in the proper jurisdiction? And then also the level of court. So are we at the trial level? Are we at the intermediate appellate level? Or are we within a court of last resort, such as the Supreme Court, right? So the level of court is going to matter, because if the opinion is coming from a higher level court, then that's going to be considered mandatory. Whereas if it's coming from a lower court, then it will not be considered mandatory, but could be considered persuasive. Okay? So in terms of the structure at the federal and state level, right, at the Supreme or our Supreme Court at the federal level is the U.S. Supreme Court, right? Texas is different in that we have 2 courts of last resort. One is the Supreme Court of Texas, and the other is the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, dealing with criminal issues. In our intermediate appeals courts, we've got the U.S. Courts of Appeals, and then the Courts of Appeals of Texas, right? And then our trial court level, we've got our U.S. District Courts, and then our Texas trial courts are district courts. Okay, so, but again, looking at jurisdiction and the level of court is important for helping us to determine whether a case is mandatory or binding for our issue. So, what about the reporter system? So, cases are published in books that are called reporters, right? Your federal and reporters will house federal cases, whereas your regional reporters will house cases from different regions within the U.S. These reporters, they can organize by jurisdiction, they can organize by topic, right? The way that these are laid out is in chronological order. But so looking at some of these, so for our federal reporters, our Supreme Court cases are going to be housed in the U.S. reports, okay? The U.S. Courts of Appeals cases will be housed in the Federal Reporter. The U.S. District Court cases will be housed in the Federal Supplement, okay? So depending on the level of court, it will, those opinions will fall within different reporters. Some states have their own reporters. Texas does not, but it does fall within the Southwestern Reporter, right? So those Texas cases are published in the Southwestern Reporter. So we've got a map here, and I'll let you follow this link on your own if you're interested. But if you were to click here, you would get to this regional reporters map, and then you hover over each of the respective states. It will tell you what reporter they fall under. So you can see Texas is highlighted in gray here, which falls under the Southwestern Reporter, as we said. Just a quick review, right? We've looked at citations before. We see our case title up front here. We've got our volume number, right? 627 is our volume within the Southwestern Reporter, right? So we've got Southwest, that's our reporter, third edition of that reporter. 239 is the first page of our case, right? And then we know that we're in Texas, and we know that this was decided in 2021. So again, that should be a review for you. Okay, as we said, just like with codified law, we have multiple methods for finding relevant case law. So, citation, right? If we have the citation, we can just enter it and go directly there, right? So, why would you have that citation? Someone gave it to you, right? You found it cited in another case. You found it cited in a secondary source. You found it cited in the annotations to a statute, right? So you found it from prior research. Party name. Sometimes you might have the party name and not know anything else, right? So you can use the party name to search for and locate the relevant case. Then we've got the one good case method. So what does that mean? It simply means that once we've found one good case, we can work to find other relevant sources. Okay, so if we find our case using citation or party name, we have determined that case is relevant, we can take other tools such as citing references, which shows the cases that are citing the case we're looking at, right? Or headnotes, which are the tools that summarize legal issues above the case. Those are created by attorney editors or sometimes AI. And then the topics and key numbers, which classify cases by subject, right? So we can take any one of those tools, working from this one good case that we have, to get to other relevant sources. So we're expanding our research from one source that we've already determined to be relevant. And then of course there's advanced searching once again. So we want to use those tools, those finding tools, working from a one good case where we can, right? But advanced searching is another option where we'd use our keywords, our Boolean operators, and then narrow by jurisdiction or court level to find relevant cases. And this will require some adjustment, right? Like your first search query within the advanced search platform is not necessarily going to be the most effective query, and you'll get more familiar with this as time goes on. So again, our one good case method, right? We said we find one good case, then we have all these other tools that are provided by Westlaw and Lexis that can help us get to additional relevant cases. So here we are pointing towards citing references, and that once again those are the cases that are citing our case. So we're looking at District of Columbia versus Heller here, and under citing references we see all of the cases that are citing DC versus Heller. Right? If we were to move over to table of authorities, we would be looking at the cases that are cited within DC versus Heller. So what our case is actually citing, what our case is actually relying on. So just a couple of tools here. We could use the citing references, we could use the table of authorities, and then we can also use tools like our headnotes and key numbers. So if you'll recall, right, headnotes summarize a point of law, and they sit right above a case, right? These are not part of the case, right? So we're not going to cite them, but we are absolutely going to use them as tools in our research. As we said, they are drafted by attorney editors or AI tools that have read the case, and then they have taken the key points and summarized them in what they believe is the helpful way, right, to help us with our research. So that is one such tool, right? Key numbers is the classification or indexing system that organizes by subject and then it gets more and more specific within those subject areas. These also are developed by attorney editors and are used as a tool to find relevant cases, right? These key numbers are only available on Westlaw. The key numbering system is specific to Westlaw and is not available on Lexis. However, you will find topics on both, which is another subject classification system, right? So what does that look like on Westlaw? We're looking at our same case here, DC versus Heller, right? And we can see at the very top, we find, if you look at the top left there, we see the synopsis, so we find our synopsis. Then the next thing below that are our headnotes, our West headnotes developed by these West attorney editors, right? And you can see headnote 1 is specific to constitutional law. More specifically, it is related to the plain, ordinary, or common meaning of something, right? So we see headnote 1, and then at right we see our key numbers, which again are specific to Westlaw, right? We've got 92 as a subject topic area, and then we get more and more specific, and then we see that key number following the letter K. So 592 is our key number here, and that is the key number that is specific to plain, ordinary, or common meaning. So here you could follow, under your headnote, you could follow the cases that cite this headnote, right? You could follow the broader topic, constitutional law, pulling into 92. If you go down to 92K 592, if you were to click in there, you would find sources that are relevant specifically to the plain, ordinary, or common meaning. Right, so we've got several tools here that we can use to get to other relevant sources, working from this one single source that we have already found. Headnotes on Lexis, right? So we said the key numbering system isn't on Lexis, but we do have headnotes, and we do have the topics on Lexis as well. So here we've got headnotes 1 and 2 that are both specific to fundamental rights and the right to bear arms, right? You could follow those headnotes, shepherdize, narrow by this headnote. You could use those to get to other relevant sources. You could also use these topics above the headnotes. You can see it's laid out constitutional law, then more specifically Bill of Rights, then even more specifically fundamental rights, and then most specifically right to bear arms. So you could follow any one of those topics to get to other relevant sources as well. Advanced searching. Advanced searching is a tool, our fourth tool, right, that we're talking about today, that you could use using your keywords and key phrases that you've already located through secondary sources, right? This you'll get better with time, right? Starting to use your Boolean terms and connectors to put these together in a way that reflects how the database is actually reading and processing your search query. So advanced searching, you'll find the same layout on Westlaw and Lexis. Right here, now we're looking at Lexis. On the right, you can see some of those use connectors. So it will lay those out for you. We saw that during our last workshop. And then at left, you can enter your queries. So you could put a phrase into exactly this phrase, right? So you could put attractive nuisance there, and you'd want to put that in quotations. If you added it in that line and pressed add, that will add it in quotations in that top search bar here. And then you want to add another word, wire, etc. You could add that into all of these terms, any of these terms, and then use that add button. And again, you will start to see how the database builds and processes that query. So this is a tool that can help you as you seek to gain an understanding of how these queries are built on each respective platform. Okay. Validating case law, right? We've talked about citators. We've talked about some of the tools that are coming from our citation system, like citing references, table of authorities, etc. But there's another hugely important reason to use citators, and we talked about that last time with codified law. But just like with codified law, we want to use our citators, KeyCite and Shepherdise on Westlaw and Lexis respectively, to ensure that the case law that we're relying on also remains good law, right? So we want to make sure the cases are still good law. We want to use the flags and signals on Westlaw and Lexis in order to do that. Okay, so what do these look like? So we looked at these with respect to codified law as well, right? But these flags can have different meanings depending on whether you're looking at a statute versus a case. So here we see a case, a red flag warns the case is no longer good law for at least one point of law. A red striped flag warns the case has been overruled in part, etc., etc. Let's look at that top one though. A red flag warns the case or administrative decision is no longer good for at least one point of law. So does that mean that you can just fully disregard this case? No, right? You need to determine if and how that point of law affects your legal argument. That point of law that is being criticized, does it matter for you? Does it matter for your research purposes? So it's not as simple as seeing a red flag and moving on and saying, no, I can't use this, right? You have a duty to further investigate and determine how that flag or signal applies. Same thing with Lexis, right? We see some of our indicators here, and same thing, right? So we talked about one, you want to use these to confirm both the codified law and case law that you're relying on remains good law. And then also, same thing here, we don't want to assume that we simply can't use a case when we see a warning signal, right? So if we see that, we don't necessarily need to ignore a case. That's not just, hey, move along, right? It's, hey, there's some point of law that has been negatively treated in some way, right? And it's our job to find out how specifically that was the case and whether that matters for our research purposes. So I first want to point out that you can find the slip opinions on the Supreme Court website. So I've just Googled Supreme Court slip opinion, and this link comes up to supremecourt.gov/opinions, right? And then you can click on opinions of the court at left, and they are organized by date, right? You can narrow into a specific date, and then you will find these slip opinions. So remember, a slip opinion is the initial publication, right, before it is then published, before the case is later published into a case reporter, right? So I've clicked on one of these, and now I can see I'm looking at the slip opinion here for Moyle versus Idaho. And then we see here a citation to what will be the U.S. reporter, right? So this is the initial publication, just this slip opinion, and then it will later be published into U.S. reports, and we can see what volume. We don't know exactly what page number, but we know when it will be published there as well, right? So just an FYI that those are available there. Okay, so now we'll go through each of these methods. I'm going to start on Westlaw. Our first method is just by citation, right? So let's say I've got this citation here. If I enter that in the, is it running? There we go. If I enter that in the top search bar, it will take me directly to that case. Same thing on Lexis, right? So I've got our precise citation. You can press enter and it'll come up, or it'll pop up as a document. Either way is fine, but we can get directly there using that citation. So our next method was case name, right? We don't have the citation, we have a case name. Our senior partner has told us there's a subtractive nuisance case involving East Texas Baptist University from 2005, okay? That's all we know. So how do we get there? We could move into content type and then cases. We could move into state materials, Texas, and then cases, right? It doesn't really matter whether you do content type or jurisdiction first. Here we've done Texas, and then we'll do all Texas cases. And then we are searching specifically within search Texas, state, and federal cases. So all we know is that we have East Texas Baptist University, and we also know that our senior partner has told us that this case is from 2005. So I'm not seeing anything from 2005 pop up yet. I can click into additional cases. Nope, nothing here. Oh, and then we look at the state cases and we see Woolridge versus East Texas Baptist. So you can see that the federal cases are listed separately from the state cases. We see our 2005 case from Texas, and so that is another way that we could have found that, just using that information that we had with that party name. We could do the same thing on Lexis. So with Westlaw we did state and then cases, right? We'll do cases here and then we'll narrow into Texas as our next step. We'll look at all Texas cases, and then we can search for, you can also do this in quotation marks, since this is the precise name, right? And then you can see your results at right. And so we're seeing the district court federal cases listed first, Court of Appeals for the U.S., but we're looking for state case, right? So we're seeing a list of federal cases first, and then eventually we start to get to our Texas cases, right? So we see Court of Appeals of Texas. We've got our 2005 date, and so in the same way, we got to the case that we're looking for just from knowing the name of the case, right, and the date, and then we confirm, and we would confirm, having read through this, that it is indeed a case related to an attractive nuisance issue. So let's work from this case that we just found, Woolridge versus East Texas Baptist University. We see our synopsis first, and then we see our head notes. You could click on synopsis, click to head notes to take you directly there, right? But we're going to look for a head note that is specific to property owners not being required to prevent injuries from naturally occurring things. So we might do a search. Control F for natural would probably be a good keyword. And then we find a couple of results. They happen to be under head note 6. Attractive nuisance doctrine applies not to natural conditions, but to things artificially created. And then head note 6 tells us under this attractive nuisance doctrine, property owner is not required to fence or prevent injury from natural occurring things such as lakes, rivers, trees, or creeks, right? So we've got multiple relevant head notes. If we scroll down, there may be additional head notes such as head note 8, which talks about naturally occurring conditions, right? But so there could be multiple head notes that are relevant to your issue, right? So let's say that we've determined head note 5 is relevant for us. We could follow negligence here. We could follow negligence here under this number, right? We could follow the cases that cite this head note. So we could do that. Which leads us to other relevant cases. We could click on the specific key number, right? So that key number 1175, that falls after the K, right? And so that's going to be things that are specific to things constituting attractive nuisances in general. So we can follow this broader topic. We could follow this broader topic that's specific to premises liability and find cases there. Or we could get really specific, right, and use that specific key number 1175 in order to get to other cases that are even more specific, right, to that things constituting attractive nuisances in general in order to get to relevant cases that way as well. Coming back to Lexis now, we're using the same case, right? We've got a summary, right? It was entitled Synopsis on Westlaw, but you can click exactly where you want to go, right? So if we want to go directly to head notes, we can click there, and then we start to see some of these head notes. Again, these are just summaries of points of law. They are not part of the case, right? But they do help you to get to other relevant cases. These are drafted on Westlaw by attorney editors, and here on Lexis using AI tools. So let's see, we'll look for another head note. We'll just choose any head note on that same natural issue, right? So I've highlighted this attractive nuisance doctrine applies not only to natural conditions, but only to things and conditions artificially created and maintained. So the language is very similar to what we saw in Westlaw, right? If I were to click here, it will take me down to the part of the case that is discussing this point of law, right? But then I can click to go straight back up as well. Then I can use more like this head note, and that will take me to other cases that may be relevant. Okay, so, and we see the legal concepts identified in the head note. This this is new, but you can start to see some of these cases at right. This is the case that we worked from, and then you can see additional cases that are listed to the right here. So you could follow those in your research, right? Our last method that we talked about was our advanced searching, our keyword searching, right? So I'm going to go back to the main page. So we had our attractive nuisance question where we're trying to find the elements. So I want to put that concept specifically on quotations, and I'm looking for the elements, right? So I can run that search. And that again takes me to a list of cases that are discussing these elements that I could work through. So here I've run the same search on Westlaw, right? And we've got now we're starting to see these AI suggestions, right? We didn't have that before. I certainly didn't have it during my law school days, right? So it's pointing us to some top cases that might be helpful, and you can tell the platform whether or not they are helpful to you. But we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, those specific elements. And then below that, we see a number of cases that on that same topic that might be helpful to us, right? We may care about a certain jurisdiction, and so not necessarily want to use that first result that comes up that is recommended by AI. So we looked at a number of different ways, right? So we looked on both Westlaw and Lexis. We looked at citation, pulling a case by citation. We looked at using a party name, right? Running a search using the party name and working from there. We looked at using our indexing tools, right, that are built from that citator system. So citing references, headnotes, key numbers, right? We found a number of different ways to work from one good case through those additional tools. And then we just looked lastly at our advanced search, right, using our terms and connectors in that top search bar. I also want to briefly call attention to the flags and signals, right, our citators to help for the purposes of confirming we are still using good law, right? So we've got a flag here. If you hover over, it just tells you it's a key cite red flag, right? If we click into the case, we can see that the judgment was reversed by this later case, right? We can also click on negative treatment, right? So negative treatment will show us how this case was impacted, right? So we can know how it was treated negatively. So we see that negative history in this instance comes from prior litigation in the same case. So we would want to look through these to determine whether the points of law that are criticized there are relevant for us. In this instance, we don't see any negative citing references. So there are no additional cases that are citing to this case with negative treatment. But you can get there through that negative treatment tab, and then as you just saw, if I just click on that flag, it will take me to that same negative treatment tab as well. I'm going to go back to the case, and then if I just click here at the top corner, powered by KeyCite, that's where I can see what those flags mean, right? And remember, we talked about the fact that they will apply to both cases and codified law, right? So you can see there are some different meanings depending on whether you're looking at codified law or case law. I'm going to click on a different case on Lexis. So this is from that list that we got to from Woolidge, I think was the name of that case. Okay, so we've got our indicator here. If you hover over, it tells us possible negative treatment is indicated. if we click there, that takes us to our citing decisions tab. So it's not a negative treatment tab, it takes us to all of the citing decisions. And then we can narrow by look for cautionary or negative treatment, right? So in this situation, we have some cautionary treatment. So I'm going to click there. And now if I scroll down, I don't see any subsequent appellate history that is related to this case itself. But I do see some other cases coming from other courts, right, that have discussed some point of law touched on in this case, and it has made some sort of distinction between this case and our case that we want to be aware of and read through and better understand, right? So this case made this distinction and cited our case. So that would take us to other relevant cases that we should be aware of because they are either criticizing or providing some cautionary information for us. I just pulled over to the right a little bit here. If you click on caution here, it will take you to this reason for Shepard's signal. And this is fairly new as well. So this is saying the following reference has been editorially selected, right? So selected by attorney editors as having the strongest influence on the overall Shepard's signal indicator of this case. So they are telling us that this particular case, Kinnison, is the most important, is the most is cautionary, but is the most important cautionary case, right? So this may or may not be true, right? It's not necessarily the case that what Lexis tells you is going to be the most important, is going to be the most important for you, especially, again, considering that that it may or may not relate to your point of law, right? You could also click Shepardized document, and that would take us to the same place we were before, citing decisions, and then we could narrow into caution. If there were negative or red, we could narrow into that. So several ways to get there. And then I want to, let me see if I can remember how to get to the signals. Okay, I clearly forget sometimes. Lexis, you have to click into a legend to see those. So you could get there a number of different ways. You could click into Shepardized document, right? You could click into our signal, and again, that takes us to that citing decisions page. And then if you scroll down just a little bit to legend here, you can click there, and then you see those respective meanings for their signal indicators, right? And then you can also see the depth of discussion, right? So you can see how heavily analyzed a certain point of law was, and we'll look at that more during our 5th session. We'll talk more about citators during that 5th session when we do our brief review of all that we've talked about this semester, and then again kind of dig in further to citators and their multiple uses. Let's take a look at our in-class exercise. Our hypo tells us that our client was injured in a drunk driving accident after a bar served alcohol to the driver despite his being visibly intoxicated. So we're researching dram shop liability, and we are seeking to find cases related to this obviously intoxicated element. Okay, so our first question asks us to use Westlaw, which is where we are now, and it tells us that you come across a case called Fayray. Now, if you had taken that case and highlighted the case from the in-class exercise and then pasted it into this top search bar, you would note that the case does not come up with that precise title. So you can see here the shortened version of commission. And so that is the reason why it did not immediately come up using that search method. These databases are fickle in their own respective ways. So the way that I'm entering it is just starting with FARE. We can see it's already pulled up here, so we confirm that that's the case we're looking for, FARE Corp v. Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. So I'm going to click there. And our hypothetical tells us that we came across this case by way of a note of decision. So you'll recall that a note of decision is similar to a head note in that it is also a brief summarization of a point of law. That summarization is drafted by attorney editors on Westlaw. But the note of decision differs from a head note in that the case that is being summarized under that note specifically relates to the application or interpretation of codified law. Okay, so a head note would summarize a point of law within a case. A note of decision would do the same thing, but again, it is specific to those cases that are seeking to interpret and provide guidance around a piece of codified law. Okay, so that's how we got here, right? We found that note of decision that pointed us to this FARE case. We are going to look for the head note that discusses the standard for obviously intoxicated. So our easiest way to do this is probably just Command F. I'm going to enter obviously intoxicated. Now we see our first result. It does speak to the standard of what a reasonably prudent person would have observed as obviously intoxicated. So that is likely our relevant head note. There are 13 results with this Command F obviously intoxicated search. Of course, we're looking through the head notes that mention that. We might also see that mentioned in the opinion itself, okay? But we've been tasked with finding a relevant head note. So we're going to stick with this looking to the use of this language within the head notes. You could have also done Command F search for standard, okay? So let's say you do the obviously intoxicated search and you have far too many results to scroll through. I use standard here. Now I'm seeing a few less results to have to read through. So you can see what we're looking at here is part of the opinion, right? But then we move up to our head note section. We see head note 5 again, server of alcohol beverages is held to an objective standard of what a reasonably prudent person would have observed as obviously intoxicated, okay? And that's what we're looking for. So that's our relevant head note 5, okay? What is the topic and key number for the head note you found there? Okay, so we look to the right. Our topic is specific to alcoholic beverages, right? And then if we move down and get more specific, we see our more specific topic and key number. So the key number falls right after that letter K. So our key number here is K1040, okay? So topic is alcoholic beverages. We see that here, and we see that here as well. And then our key number is, again, K1040. So we're going to click on that key number for the next question. And it's asking us how many state cases are there. Okay, so we clicked directly on that key number. We have already narrowed our jurisdiction to Texas, right? And then we see a total of 10 cases, right? We see 10 here. We see 1 through 10 here as well, okay? So 10 cases. What's the name of the most recent Supreme Court case? So you could scroll through all of these cases, right? You could also narrow at the left by jurisdiction. So we're in Texas, right? We're looking for decisions from the Texas Supreme Court, okay? So now we've narrowed our 10 results down to a mere 2 results. And then our question asks, what's the name of the most recent Supreme Court case? We've got a case from 1997 and a case from 1890. So your answer here is Southland Corp v. Lewis, because it is the most recent of those two cases from the Texas Supreme Court. Okay, our next question asks us to return to our Fay-Wray case. Okay, so here we are back on our Fay-Wray case. How many cases cited? Okay, so remember we talked about the table of authorities are going to be those authorities that the case that we're looking at is citing. So if we were to click on table of authorities, we would see the cases cited by Fay-Wray Corp, right? So now we want to look, our question asks us how many cases cite Fay-Wray Corp. Okay, so if we go to citing references, we can see not only cases, but other sources that have cited our case, again, Fay-Wray Corp. But we're looking for how many cases, so we'll narrow into cases that have cited our case. So we know that's 19, right? We can see at left there were 19 cases that cited our case, 17 secondary sources, etc. But we're looking at cases. Okay, so we've got 19 cases citing Fay-Wray. And then the question asks us, how many of those just relate to the issue highlighted in Headnote 5? So we can go to filters here, and then we can actually scroll down, and we can narrow by Headnote topic at left here. So we can click into Headnote topic. Okay, we know that our Headnote 5, was specific to alcoholic beverages, not admin law and not evidence. So I'm going to click on alcoholic beverages here. And then we see Headnote 3, right? We also see Headnote 5. We see Headnote 6. And then we see Headnote 7. So those are our 4 headnotes that are listed here. But we are concerned with Headnote 5, right? Remember our keynote, K1040. And then we are going to move into these 2 citing references that speak to Headnote 5. Okay, so how many cases cite Fay-Wray? We had 19 cases, right? But then in terms of the cases that are citing Fay-Wray and related to Headnote 5, it's 2 of those cases, right? Okay. Let's turn now to Lexis. So our question tells us that we came across a secondary source item resource, right? And that resource is Dorsanio's Texas Litigation Guide. So if you have the name of a source, remember we can just simply type the name of that source and it should come up as a source on Lexis, okay? So we're going to move directly into Dorsanio's Texas Litigation Guide. Remember that Dorsanio's Texas Litigation Guide and his other secondary sources are only available on Lexis, right? So I know many of you have a preference for Westlaw, right? There are items that Lexis will have that Westlaw will not, and vice versa. So for the time being, you should explore both of these for your LP assignments. And again, you never know if you will have access to Lexis or Westlaw in practice. So it is to your benefit to become familiar with both of these platforms, right? So you can be prepared regardless of which platform your firm provides. Okay, so we're here now at our Dorsanio's Texas Litigation Guide. We know that we're going to section 323.01. Okay, so here we are. We're going to look for 323. Okay, so we see that here. Chapter 323 is on liquor liability. We're going to look for .01, so let's look under Part 1. Section 323.01, liability of commercial providers. Remember here that we are looking at a secondary source, right? And it has various sections to read through, but we're looking here at a secondary source and not a statutory code section, right? Okay, so our question says, what Texas Supreme Court case does this section cite to for the obviously intoxicated standard of care? So I think I would probably Command F search standard. We see a mention of standard care here. And then the information below tells us that licensees and permittees who sell alcoholic beverages could be liable for injuries caused by the intoxication of persons to whom they provided alcoholic beverages. And then we see the statutory code section, right? We see that citation there. Alcohol providers may be civilly liable under the statute if at the time the alcohol provided, it was apparent to the provider that the recipient was obviously intoxicated to the extent that the recipient presented a clear danger to him or herself and to others. And then we see once again a reference to a statutory code section, right? Texas Alcoholic and Beverages Code section 2.02 B1, and then we see a reference to a case, right? And so the case is Smith v. Sewell, and then we see our case citation. And so really what we've done here is just do that Command F search, standard of care, and then we're reading to find that. We are looking for that citation, and again, it is Smith v. Sewell, following that citation to the relevant statutory code section. Okay. Now our next question says, let's follow that case, so we can simply click here. And then we're asked which headnote discusses the duty owed to the general public and the intoxicated customer not to serve alcohol when the licensee knows the patron is intoxicated. So we can do our Command F search here. Let's start with right, we could do several Command F searches. We could do duty, we could do general public. So I'm going to do general public and just see how many results I get. So I get only 4 results. So let's stick with that. That's pretty simple. And we can look for headnotes, right? Here we see discussion in the actual just judicial opinion. But we want to look, and here's within a footnote, right? But we want to look specifically at headnotes. So you'll see here we've got discussion of the duty of general public in headnote 1. So alcoholic beverage licensee owes a duty to all members of the general public not to serve alcoholic beverages when the licensee knows or should know the patron is intoxicated. Okay, so that's our relevant headnote 1. So let's click here at left. That's going to take us to the part of the opinion that discusses that point of law, right? So we see that discussion here. To which authority does the court cite on the duty not to serve when they know the patron is intoxicated? Okay, so we saw that headnote again. We see that language there. And then the case that is listed here is Pastor, and then we see that citation. Okay, so the authority that the court cites for that headnote, that point of law relating to that headnote, is Pastor. Okay, let's go back. So we're on headnote, we looked at headnote 1. We want to go back to the actual headnote area. So we simply click here, and it takes us up to that headnote that we had identified previously. And then remember we said that Westlaw has the key numbering system that is specific to Westlaw, so Lexis does not have that, but it does list its the topics that become more and more specific as you go down the line. So our question says, use the string of topics to find more cases on that topic. How many cases, Texas cases, are there that include the phrase obviously intoxicated? Okay, so we can go to our get documents following that top string. You can see our results here are listed at right, and we could scroll down to view them here. You can also move up to these alternative ways of looking at these cases, right? So we'll move to our first option. If you were to go here, you would not see those short overviews, okay? So right now, let's see, we've got almost 4,000 cases, right? So we've followed that topic, right? And now we're going to narrow by jurisdiction. We actually use court here. We see our federal courts and then our state courts. So we'll narrow into Texas. And then we see our Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, Court of Appeals, and District Court. So all levels of Texas courts. We're going to look at all of these cases. These are all Texas cases, right? So now we're looking at 91 cases, okay? But we specifically want those cases that are mentioning, obviously, intoxicated. So we're going to use this search within results, okay? And then we can enter our obviously intoxicated to view those results, okay? So we went from 91 to 47. So using that string of topics, we got to those topics specific to the general overview. Then we narrowed using our jurisdiction filter, and then we narrowed using our search within and entering that obviously intoxicated language. If you have any questions about the in-class exercise or final assessment, please reach out, let us know. We are happy to help. Thank you.